Hi, everyone. I'm Shaheen from The Content Mix, and I'm excited to be here with Alex McNab-Lundbäck, Chief Communications Officer at Handiscover, a holiday booking site specialized in accessible accommodation. Thanks so much for joining us, Alex.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Could you just start out telling us a little bit more about yourself? I know you have had a varied career, so if you could put it all into context a little bit and tell us about also what you do now at Handiscover.
I'll certainly try. Yeah. So I currently the Chief Communications Officer for Handiscover, as you said. I have done a little bit of everything. I'm currently in Denmark, living in Denmark, but working in Sweden. I've been in Denmark for the last 3 years, and had a few roles since I've been in Denmark. Before that, I was from the UK. You can probably tell from my accent that I'm British. And worked in a range of roles there, from marketing and communications and PR and agency side, and before that in China as a journalist. So, as you said, a very varied career, which has now found myself as Chief Communications Officer, for want of a better title, at Handiscover.
Okay, and you just joined recently, right? So what made you decide at this stage in your career to join a startup, right? Handiscover is a startup company. Can you tell us a bit more, kind of like what brought you there?
Yeah, so I've been there 6 months, partly the situation of COVID. So I was made redundant from my last role at Phase 1 due to COVID, like so many other people in marketing and communications were made redundant at the beginning of this year, first half of this year. And so that kind of forced me to look for my next opportunity. And this really interesting opportunity came up in Handiscover. Handiscover kind of caught my eye just because of what it was doing, something different. It was approaching and is approaching a different audience, so targeting people with disabilities. So it was a kind of a charitable angle, but without working for a charity, which was really interesting to me. It was kind of also an interesting challenge that here I was being made redundant because of COVID. COVID has hit the travel sector massively, and here I was being offered a senior role in essentially a travel organization, or the travel and hospitality industry. So I found that as quite a really kind of interesting and ironic challenge for me to take on. And it's been a really interesting and very 6 months, I have to say, in trying to get things up from scratch in terms of a marketing and communications department, and doing things differently in a year that has seen us all do things very different.
Yeah, definitely. And I imagine the company is quite impacted by the situation. I mean, people are traveling less, but it being a startup, they're investing in future growth, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that again, like so many other companies, what we had to do very quickly in April or May was pivot. Is work out what the future of the company was going to be. And if it wasn't going to be as an online travel agency, or OTA for short, then what's our next step? How are we going to continue to grow this? And how are we going to find new audiences and new sectors, and how we can kind of draw on our experience and our expertise to do something different and really make a name for ourselves. And so we're still working in the travel and hospitality sector, but we're now broadening out to more B2B and broadening out beyond just hotels and B&Bs and properties, and more into how can our knowledge of accessibility for a disabled audience, how can that benefit every public space that you have a need to be in day-to-day life. So how is that going to affect airplanes, airports, shopping malls, public transportation, just getting about the city? How can our knowledge of accessibility data help those people that need to get about, not just when they're in hotels and B&Bs, but when they're just living their day-to-day. And so that's why we're now coming up with a series of products and services that will hopefully help our target audience cope better in day-to-day life.
Mm-hmm. I mean, can you tell us a bit about the backstory on like why Handiscover started? I mean, of course, like all the booking platforms have filters to search for accessible accommodation. Why did the founders think it was necessary to have a dedicated platform for this?
Yeah, so it's founded by our CEO and founder, Sebastian Archambault, and his son is disabled. And he found that it was, yes, you can have the filters, you can find the properties that are disabled, but what you don't have is a real concrete level of data that says, okay, so it's an accessible room. But apart from it meeting the legal standards as to what is required to make that room accessible, does it actually have? What is the turning circle in that room? And can I guarantee that I'm going to get a particular room that has those particular features? They were finding that some hotels or some properties were all marked as accessible, but they all had different sizes of bathrooms. They all had different positions of handrails. They all had different heights of pegs and access cards on doors and as you come into the rooms. So there wasn't necessarily one standard. And what Handiscover tried to do and aimed to do was to be able to make it really simple for you not to be able to just find an accessible accommodation, but have a guaranteed set of criteria that you can apply to that particular hotel. And so all of the hotels or the properties were graded sort of a 1, 2, or 3 as to can you manage a few steps or can you not manage at all? And that's how they were all categorized. And then you knew exactly what was in that room, what the facilities were in that room, and then guaranteed to get a particular room. So that was the kind of the USP of the site, was that it was dedicated to making sure that someone who requires an accessible room was getting exactly what they wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess this is a pretty big addressable market, and it's offering an extra level of service for that audience, right?
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you, I mean, your roles have spanned from marketing and communications. You've worked in government, you worked in private businesses. I wanted to ask, well, actually, what I thought of more things I could ask, but what I originally was going to ask, if you think there's a clear line between communication and marketing and how those functions have evolved over your career.
Yeah, I think that it now in 2020, 2021, I think that there is such a blurred line between all of these disciplines: marketing, communications, PR, journalism, video production, audio production, social media, that, it's all just blurs into this kind of, I guess this content sphere. I think that there is, it's all tied together. And I think that, my role as CCO has communications in the title. Previously, that might be a head of comms or director of communications or something else. And you'd just be responsible for maybe media relations and some internal communications. But now that role does span marketing. And if it spans marketing, it spans social media. If it spans social media, it's video content. If it's spanning communications, it's direct, it's email, which still exists. So it's traditional PR, if you like, it's events. And so those lines have just become so blurred that to be a communications manager, to be a communications executive person, one of a different expression, is to be a marketer, and to be a marketer is to be in comms, and to be in PR is to do communications, and there's just there's big crossover. I should be doing one of those fancy charts where there's this big kind of all these circles cross over and it looks like the Olympics or something. But it's so blurred. And so I think that in my role now, and I think most important that in 2020 or 2021, as we're about to go into, having this varied career, being able to have experience of doing all of these sectors, all of these industries, all of these disciplines, has allowed me to be able to see things from 101 different points of view, which every marketer, every comms person, every PR person has to do in order to be successful in their roles or with their brands in this current day and age. So it's all so interlinked now than it ever used to be.
Yeah. And actually, maybe content creation is the common thread of everything you've done, because if I remember from your LinkedIn, you started out in video production. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, correct. So that was, I did video production when I was at university. I did audio production when I was at university. I then went into radio to do audio production before going into, I suppose, going back to communications. And journalism, and then PR from an agency side, and now kind of technically back into communications, and maybe communications with more of a marketing focus. Mm-hmm. So you're right, content is the kind of the running thread through it all, because every single role that I've done, there has been a need for producing some sort of content, whatever that may be. And it's the kind of the one solid standard. We might be pushing that content out in different ways than we used to be able to, because of all the channels available to us. But the content is still the the baseline need for marketing and communications and PR professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, I wanted to get your opinion on what do you think, I mean, at Handiscover and in general, I guess, like what kind of content do you think is needed to, like, I don't know, what works best in your industry? What kinds of content? How do you connect with your audience?
I think a bit of everything. I think that when you start thinking about your audience as you would think, because we're all human beings and we all consume media pretty much the same. And one thing that we are as humans, I think it's human nature, is that we get bored very easily, and we like to, specifically now, we are being exposed to so many different types of media, from audio to video to written form. And so you have to kind of mix that up. You have to have a whole mix of content. And in order for it to be successful. So I don't think there's particularly one format. Yes, there are trends. Like, I think, a while ago, 2 years ago, I've been saying, make sure you do more video. Now I'm saying do some live video. Now I'm saying do 20-second videos and put them into stories, be it LinkedIn stories or Instagram stories. And I'm sure it will be something again next year that maybe hasn't even thought about yet. And now audio is coming back. Podcasts are coming back. So now I'm sort of saying, actually, no, forget about video. Do podcasts and film just like you're doing now. Do a podcast, film it, and then you've got 2 pieces of content. Great. You've got content for the next week. Slice that up and dice it and happy days. So I think it's finding ways to be creative and finding ways to be able to produce as much content as you can in different ways, because every single person in your audience will consume content differently. And you need to try and cater to everyone, and you're not going to be able to do that with one particular format for whatever reason. It's about doing a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm. And now working at a startup where I imagine you probably don't have like multi-million budgets yet, like how do you decide where to make your bets on, like, in terms of content and marketing channels? I mean, how do you make the most out of your budget?
I think it is about that. It's about thinking creatively. It's about making one piece of content and turning that into 10. And I think so many people think, right, great, I'm going to go out and do a video. And they go out and they do a great video, and that's lovely. And then that's it. They put that video up on LinkedIn that has long form content, or another channel that has long form content, Facebook or whatever. And then that's it. They write some nice copy and they have the video attached to it, and happy days. What they don't think is the bigger picture. They sort of say, great, I've got a half an hour video. I can turn that into 300 pieces of sound bites of 5 seconds long. I can make sure that I do a landscape and a vertical format, so that I can put the vertical format onto stories that are 20 seconds long. I can do a written transcript and turn that into a blog post. People aren't, maybe that's harsh. I'm thinking because that's very generalized. I'm sure people are doing that as well. But I think that that's really the key. I'm not saying that people aren't doing that, but I think that it's very easy for people to think, right, I need to do a video. I need to do a blog post. I need to do a podcast. I need to do X, Y, and Z, without thinking about, well, why can't one thing, one moment, one piece of content become 10, 20, 30 pieces of content with super easily, without a huge amount of effort. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're certainly trying to do. We're still in the early stages, I think, of creating lots and lots of content as to where we are with Handiscover. But I think that's a crucial piece of advice for anybody who's either starting out or trying to create more content is use what you've got and maximize on if you put effort doing a Facebook Live that's 35 minutes long, maximize on that. Turn that into a podcast, turn that into a blog story, turn that into 5 social media posts, and you'll make your life a lot easier. And suddenly you realize that you've got 30, 40 pieces of content from, those few hours of work that you did creating the Facebook Live in the first place. So don't duplicate, because people will get the information in different ways and you'll still be communicating to your audience.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in your experience, kind of like, I mean, not exactly starting from scratch, but starting in a lot of new processes and initiatives at Handiscover, like, how are you? I mean, it's easy to say, like, make repurpose things a million ways, but there's actually like a lot of work behind that, right? So what's it like creating the processes for all that?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely key. You've got to think about what that process is, and I think a lot of it comes down to doing the work beforehand. So it's not thinking of it as an afterthought. It's thinking about it before you go out and create it. So when if you're putting together a Facebook Live, write a script beforehand, because then it'll be a hell of a lot easier for you to then edit that into a blog post. When you do the Facebook Live, don't come back to it 2 days later and start thinking about editing it into lots of different pieces. Unless you're doing the Facebook Live yourself. But if you're not doing the Facebook Live or have somebody else do it, watch the Facebook Live and make a note of the time code and the sound bites that are great. Because if you do that as you go, then it's super easy to kind of, throw that video in iMovie, and 5 minutes later, you've got a sound bite that you can top and tail with a brand image and hey presto. So although it sounds like a lot of work, actually, if you know beforehand what you're going to do with the footage or what you're going to do with the content, then actually it becomes pretty straightforward, I think. And maybe I'm sort of downplaying how much work is actually involved, but I think planning is the key.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Like with good planning, you can make it a lot less work overall and get more out of it. And like you were saying, the initial work of creating the content is actually what takes the most time. So you can get
exactly.
the most out of it. So I wanted to ask you if you can give us any sneak peek of what you have in store for content at Handiscover. I know you said that you're still in the planning phase of a lot of it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we are very much in the early stage of things. I mean, one thing that we're doing is we now, we do Facebook Lives, and we've been doing those every 2 weeks for the last 4 or 5 weeks, I imagine. So we've got about 4 or 5 now under our belt. We'll likewise about multi-purposing. We started off just being a Facebook Live. We're now looking to use that content in more channels and put that on YouTube and put that on Instagram and use those as in other channels as well. We have our first webinar coming out. I talked a little bit about going to a different audience, a more B2B audience. So we have a B2B webinar that is planned for next week. So again, we'll be taking the content that is used with that webinar, we'll be slicing and dicing, we'll be creating probably, potentially 50 to 100 pieces of content from that 1 hour webinar. So I think the next few months are going to be super exciting for me as a content marketer, if you like, to see about all the different things that we can do and how we can utilize these new tools and channels that are out there to be able to market themselves. And I think that with these Facebook Lives and YouTube Lives and Instagram Lives and webinars, what it also gives you a chance to do is to have an event to test out other marketing channels. So what we're starting to do is going to be like, right, if we want to promote this on LinkedIn, why don't we try LinkedIn stories? We might think that they're a bit naff at the moment because it's LinkedIn trying to be Instagram, and why would that work? But try it and see if it works. And you just never know. You might just tap into an audience that really, or a format even, that really works for you. So I think that's what's quite interesting about having moments to be able to market, because it gives you a chance to sort of say, hey, let's try this, let's try that, let's try this. Mm-hmm. So I very much watch this space, but I think that the aim is to make Handiscover a lot more known across everybody, whether you're going to use the site or use their services in the future, but just make Handiscover a lot more known about what we're doing. And as a result, a lot more content on a range of different channels.
Mm-hmm. And what's like your kind of focus or your niche on the subjects that you're touching on in your content?
Well, we're an accessibility data provider, an accessibility data expert. So we'll be talking a little bit about the need for greater accessibility across in day-to-day life and across industries. And so that's that. We'll be kind of drawing upon our expertise in that sense with our webinars and our content. At the same time, for our Facebook audience, we'll still focus on our thought leadership for destinations and where people can be going and how people can find accessible destinations when they can travel again, whenever that may be. Mm-hmm. So we'll still be kind of keeping that brand awareness out. Travel won't be suspended forever, we hope. So there's still a need for that B2C angle within Handiscover. So we'll definitely have the two angles. I think we'll be having our B2B channels and angles, which will be more about thought leadership and positioning ourselves as global experts in accessibility data. And then there'll be our B2C stuff, which will be about destinations and about driving people to the online travel agency side of Handiscover.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. Like you said, yeah, you're putting more of a focus on B2B going forward. So interesting to see what you come up with there. Okay. So I wanted to ask you, well, we talked a little bit about your background and career. Do you have any advice for anyone just starting out now, how to like get their foot in the door in the industry?
Talk to people. It sounds so simple, but talk and network with as many people as you can. And I think, I have to admit, I think that marketing and communications and PR, and I'm going to try and cram that into marketers maybe. There must be a want of a term that covers all units. But as an industry, I think you'll agree, we're pretty friendly people. So actually, I get lots of people on LinkedIn just kind of connecting with me and then sending me messages saying, hey, I'm an intern. Hey, I'm a graduate. Hey, I'm looking for my next position. And some are junior, some are senior. Some people just want to chat and just discuss something that they've had, or maybe we've crossed paths in the past. And so I think one piece of advice is just to talk to so many people. I think nearly every single one of my roles has come from some kind of network. It hasn't come from filling in application forms. It hasn't come from LinkedIn quick apply. It hasn't come from traditional job applications and seeing it on Glassdoor and then applying. It's come from talking to people and networking. So the more, and even if it doesn't necessarily lead to a job opportunity, it will lead to knowledge and it will lead to sharing and inspiration, and people that can help you. And I think marketers are a pretty friendly bunch. So don't be scared to reach out.
Yeah, definitely agree. And actually, even more relevant right now, I mean, any advice for people who are looking to reinvent themselves or maybe, who were made redundant and looking for their next opportunity?
Yeah, I think all of the usual tips, I guess, about career advice. I think make yourself known, be active on social media in the right way. I should say, say the right things, but be active. Update your LinkedIn and be active on LinkedIn. Comment, engage with people, write your own posts, share your thoughts and feelings, because I think that's also really important. Is how you get yourself noticed. People will check out people's LinkedIn profile as probably a number one. It is your online brand. So do everything you can to try and improve on that. And again, reach out for help if you don't know how to do that. Like, there'll be plenty of people who will give you advice or help or nudge in the right direction. And I think that this year, COVID has shown that, particularly in our industry, so much warmth from people. And there's been so many posts of outreach from people saying, hey, my contact is really struggling to find a job. If you've got anybody that you can introduce them to, we really appreciate it. And putting themselves out there. And in this day and age and in this time going forward, people shouldn't be scared of doing that. And they shouldn't be scared of redundancy. They shouldn't be scared of being jobless, because so many of us have been or could be in the future. And so we'll always be in the same boat. And I think that most people will be willing to help out.
Yeah, totally agree. Great point. And kind of on that line, like, what do you think, do you have any tips for keeping skills up to date in terms of marketing skills?
Again, I'm sounding like I work for LinkedIn, but I'm such an advocate of the platform, because actually, there is so much on LinkedIn that you can get for free in regards to training, or very low cost if you have to get a premium subscription or whatever. But look for the free or very cheap training that's offered digitally, whether it's on LinkedIn or what is it, Udemy? Probably pronouncing that correct, Udemy. Any of those platforms where you have actually pretty pretty good training for a fairly low cost. So seek those out. And again, just talk to people and reach out for knowledge or for advice. Even if it's what to read, like, reach out to someone and say, I've had a few messages actually recently. Maybe it's the new lockdown in the UK, and my UK contacts are reaching out, and they're sort of saying, what have you been reading? Like, what blogs are you reading? Who's saying some cool stuff at the moment? What articles should I be delving into? And sometimes I can say, I've not read anything this week. I've just been switching off at the end of the workday and watching Netflix. Other times I've said, I read this really super article in The Guardian. Here's the link. Check it out. So sharing knowledge.
Yeah. What have you been reading? You have any recommendations?
What have I been reading? I've actually been reading a really interesting the biography of who have we been reading? Thomas Jefferson. I was going to say Edison, but that was someone completely different. Thomas Jefferson, who people may know was a
founding father.
founding father, exactly. President of the United States of America a very long time ago. Yeah. I have just been fascinated, I think, about leadership. Maybe my interest with the US election has been piqued recently in regards to how do you lead a nation and how do you do it well? And it's been expanding my knowledge of US presidents, which I have to admit I didn't have a great knowledge of beforehand. But also just a little bit about leadership, which is helping me a lot, I think, in terms of giving me some inspiration as to how I want to lead, how I would like to lead my team, how I would like to. I'm not leading a nation, but I think you can borrow lots of things from reading about leaders as to how they lead, and it might be right or wrong. You might read about a leader, you're like, I'm never doing it like that. But you might also take some inspiration and go, that's a really good idea, or that's a really good tactic. That's something that I can bring into my role. So. It's not really marketing related or content related, but it is giving me inspiration at the moment in terms of how I conduct myself professionally.
Yeah, that's a good point. And do you have any other professional role models?
I don't know whether I really have role models as such. I have people that at different points in my career I've looked to as figures of inspiration. So maybe that is a role model. Maybe that is the definition of a role model. But I've kind of had a few people, I think, over the course of my career that have done that. Josh Earnest, when I started working in government, Josh Earnest was someone that I looked up to, along with Alistair Campbell. And there were things I liked and things I disliked about those people. But all of them helped me guide kind of how I wanted to be as a communicator, particularly in government. So, how did Josh Earnest communicate with, as White House Press Secretary? And I still think to this day he's probably one of the best White House Press Secretaries in modern times. Really fascinating way of communicating. And the same with Alistair Campbell. I still don't agree with a lot of Alistair Campbell's politics or the way he conducts himself. But he is was and is a very good communicator, and what he did for Tony Blair was actually quite remarkable in regards to their communications and marketing strategy. So some really interesting insights have come from Alistair Campbell. But role models as such, they're just bits of inspiration rather than role models.
No, it's a really good point that, like, in politics, you have some of the most, advanced communication. That's definitely a good place to look to for inspiration. I was also, we didn't really touch on that part of your career, but you were like a press consultant for the Cabinet Office, which I'm not that familiar with, like how UK government works. So maybe you can just explain a little what you did then.
Yeah, so exactly. So the Cabinet Office has a government communications service, or I say the government has a government communications service that works from the Cabinet Office. So I work there, and that is about supporting ministers, supporting Prime Minister at the time. It is a civil servant position, so you're not tied to any particular political party as such. You're simply working for the government and Her Majesty's government, whoever that might be leading that. And yeah, a super interesting time learning about how the government communicates. And I still am a firm believer that the government communications service, in terms of communications, is probably one of the best. I use that a lot. I should really stop doing that.
Well, they can't see it if you're listening to the audio version, but the air quote.
No, okay, yeah, the air quotes. Sorry, I've been doing air quotes a lot. But I think they're probably one of the best agencies to give them another terminology, because I think that and again, in terms of resources, I should say actually that the resources that are provided often for free because it's a government service from the Government Communication Service, or GCS. Is they can be really, really good, whether it's media relations or whether it's just communications or writing advice in general. So to give that a Google and check those out, those resources out.
Yeah,
but yeah, the Government Communication Service runs out of the Cabinet Office and basically spans all government departments in the UK. I was working from Whitehall in the Cabinet Office and supporting ministers and prime ministers in their communications, and that included social media or press releases or events, statements, all of those things that go into making sure that the ministers and prime ministers of the day have what they need to be able to communicate efficiently. So very different role to what I'm doing now, a very different role to what I've done in the past. But at the same time, there's a lot of crossover as well. There's a lot of blurred lines between communicating the brand, in that case was the government. But a brand can be the government, or it can be an online travel agency, or it can be a high-end camera manufacturer. It doesn't really make a great deal of difference. The communications, the underpinning communications rules or strategy still need to be in place in order for you to be able to communicate efficiently and effectively.
Yeah.
So yeah, really, really interesting time, and it's still, as you can probably tell by some of the role models that I mentioned, I still have an active interest in politics, and it still influences me and inspires me sometimes for what to do or what not to do in every day of my life.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Very cool. So we're reaching the end of the interview. So I just wanted to give you the chance to share any parting advice or final takeaways with other marketers and communicators across Europe.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that we've already said it, that I think that it has been a challenging 2020. It's been a challenging year for marketers and communicators. I saw that firsthand. Being let go from my role at Phase One earlier in the year, and I know that I'm certainly not the only one. And it's been a really challenging year, but I think it's about now looking towards the future, look towards 2021. Things will get better, things already are getting better. But use those tips that I've already said. Reach out to as many people as possible, and start making some content, whatever that may be. I think that sometimes I can't stress that enough. When I see brands that I'm either working with at Handiscover or just brands that I've come across, and I see that they haven't posted for 3 months on their social media channels, and yet have got 5,000 followers. It's head in hands moment. I was like, what are you doing? You've got 5,000 followers and you've not had a single piece of content for 3 months. It worries me. I'm sure there's plenty of brands that are not doing that and they're churning out loads and loads of content. But yeah, start producing content, however simple, and start reaching out and talking to more people, and hope that 2021 is certainly going to be well, it can't be any worse, can it? Better year than 2020 has been.
Yeah, here's hoping. Absolutely. Well, that's a great note to end on. Inspiring look to the future. So thank you, Alex, so much for sharing your insights with us today.
You're welcome. Pleasure.
And thanks everybody for listening in. For more perspectives on the content marketing industry in Europe, check out thecontentmix.com and keep tuning into the podcast for daily interviews. See you next time. Bye.